Everyday Samurai, Episode 10. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. Are you starting to see that your study of Japanese combat systems in this day and age is bigger than just self-defense, that it's about a culture that upholds dignity and the protection of private property, and that such a culture is the foundation of civilization and the basis, the mainspring, if you will, of elevating living standards for all of humanity? We have to see the forest and the trees simultaneously to know just how important securing each individual and a private property social order is to everything we call good. That includes respect for individual rights, the abundance of material goods at our disposal, and relative peace that most of us enjoy. And it's very fragile. We see the effects of its absence in many parts of the world while watching it erode at home. Most people alive today have forgotten just how important physical protection is, and the systems that contribute to it is all that we hold dear. So the methods and tactics for protecting private property, which includes bodies and individuals in their own capacity, is our topic for today. You know, there's a familiar phrase that states that there is nothing new under the sun. When it comes to tactics or techniques, we can borrow from Sun Tzu, who wrote in Chapter 5 of his Art of War, and just to note, I'm taking some poetic license with the order in which I quote these passages. In battle, there are no more than two types of attacks, common and uncommon. Yet the variations of the common and uncommon cannot all be anticipated. The common and the uncommon produce each other like an endless circle. Who can comprehend them? Like the sun and the moon, they set and rise again. Like the four seasons, they end and begin again. There are no more than 5 musical notes, yet the variations in the 5 notes cannot all be heard. There are no more than 5 basic colors, yet the variations in the 5 colors cannot all be seen. There are no more than 5 basic flavors, yet the variations in the 5 flavors cannot all be tasted. Generally, in battle, use the common to engage the enemy, and the uncommon to gain victory. Those skilled at the uncommon maneuvers are as endless as the heavens and earth, and as inexhaustible as the rivers and seas. So now, I'll move on to Miyamoto Musashi and his water scroll within the Book of Five Rings, where he describes how there are generally only 5 guard positions in which to hold the sword. And after providing these descriptions, he basically says that it matters not whether you adopt the high guard or the low guard, the left guard or the right. What matters in combat is that you think of cutting your opponent. And now I'll transition to some choice passages from Igensho, the Book of Dignity, General Principles of Martial Art by Karasuma Kantaro. And by the way, you can get a free PDF download of this extraordinary book at everydaysamurai.life/dignity. That's everydaysamurai.life/dignity. The random, prepared, spontaneous application of integrated skills, tactics, and strategy supported by logistics according to policy based on philosophy is called technique with a capital T. Technique in skills is a method of implementing tactical aims mechanically by evading, subduing, and striking down the adversary. First, an important distinction must be made as to the meaning of terms. Technique is an uncountable term. The plural form techniques, a countable term, has a different significance entirely. For techniques, substitute the term skills. There is method, and there are methods. The two should not be confused, whether by virtue of study, training, or talent, whether by experience or research, or, as in most cases, by some combination of all these factors. The ability is developed to solve problems and to overcome opposition effectively. This capability, functioning organically and spontaneously, is erroneously called instinct. Its proper name is technique, again with a capital T. For purposes of clarity, therefore, it will serve the reader well to utilize the term skills rather than techniques, in order to avoid confusion with the term technique. Technique is like air. It is one thing, irreducible and formless, fluid and adapting to every situation with perfect flexibility, filling every void, unassailable, inescapable, bringing life or death. The benignant power of deterrence, or the malignant power of the force option. One either has technique or one does not. Technique cannot be taught, but unlike instinct, it can be learned. Once acquired, it may be greater or lesser according to degree, but ultimately one either has it or one does not. It cannot be codified, analyzed, or enumerated. Mere competency with the mechanisms of skill is not technique. The ability to avoid defeat, to avoid or solve problems efficiently and appropriately, and to overcome opposition consistently by the use of innate principle applied randomly and spontaneously, such as to achieve objectives frequently and to win when possible, is technique. One may memorize every pattern there is, know the sequence and drills of numerous arts and methods, and still not have technique. What are commonly referred to as techniques are specific concrete manifestations of abstract principle delimited by form and function according to narrowly defined aims and conditions. These skills are the precipitate that emerges when abstract principle is brought to bear on any specific concrete problem. Technique is like the air. The air is invisible. You breathe it in and out. When the temperature drops, your warm breath condenses and forms a cloud of vapor, making the air visible. It is like electricity. Electricity exists in a potential, invisible state until conditions concentrate and conduct it from the clouds to the ground in the form of a bolt of lightning. Harnessing that power through an understanding of principle, one makes all manner of machines. Technique is like electricity. Skills are the specific devices used to conduct and focus technique to the achievement of specific ends. A single principle has 10,000 applications. Each machine may have a few uses or perhaps only one. The use of a given skill for the specific purpose inherent in its design is appropriate. But the most important use of a body of specific mechanical drills is as a pattern of clues that can lead to a grasp of general principle. Thus, the purpose of training skills or techniques is to acquire technique, with a capital T. The purpose of acquiring technique is to derive techniques or skills spontaneously and appropriately according to conditions, thereby implementing tactical aims. Tactical aims are accomplished in service of strategic aims. Strategic aims are realized in service of policy objectives. Strategy, tactics, and skills all require logistical support. Policy objectives are implemented as a manifestation of philosophic beliefs or values. Thus, without philosophy, there can be no coherent policy. Without policy, there can be no effective strategy. Without strategy, no tactical direction. Without tactical direction, no useful application of skills is possible. That's a tremendous quote from a magnificent book, and I certainly hope you do check out Igen's show, The Book of Dignity, General Principles of Martial Art. And to help us understand that at a more fundamental level, we have the book's author, Karasuma Kantaro, who, for our purposes, we call Jim. Jim, welcome to Everyday Samurai. You've said something very profound. Technique is like air, or it's like electricity. It is a potential field, if you will, of untapped energy until it's called upon. Is that the proper understanding of what you mean when you say technique is like air?
Well, it's something which is abstract and invisible, does have material form, but we are not aware of it unless we make contact physically. So this is something that exists in a potential state until it gets into our lungs and begins to interact with our blood and our digestion and all the rest in order to produce energy, which is conducted through the physical mechanisms of the body to interface with other physical material in the world and produce effects. And this is perhaps a much simpler way of understanding the idea of technique. Technique is the ability or the capacity to produce specific effects at will. It's the means, whether it is systematic or methodical or not, of achieving a desired end by producing a desired effect at will. That may be an easier way to explain it. So once we have gone through the process of developing through the training of skills and through the training of awareness and mindset and all the contextual elements of history and philosophy and economics and everything that goes into making policy, we are able to interact with a physical environment and with living things within that environment according to constantly shifting conditions in a way which we ourselves are not necessarily able to anticipate. Technique is the ability to act or to react an engaged condition in such a way as to produce the desired effect in order to achieve the desired result, which is to say the effect is short-term and the result is long-term.
So can technique manifest until there is a demand placed upon it? I mean, if it's sitting in its potential dormant state, technique will only emerge once it's demanded to manifest.
Yes, one could say that. I would not like to confuse the issue by assuming that your term demand indicates a conscious request or requirement for a particular action. But conditions produce the demand, which may be so subtle or so complex or so rapid that it is not susceptible of conscious thought. So the demand may come in the form of some sort of explosive, sudden emergency which has no duration at all. You are sitting at your table on the sidewalk out in front of a little cafe having a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper. The next thing you know, a taxi cab is coming at you directly from the street at 30 miles an hour. You've got no time at all to perceive and decide and act in order to preserve your life by not getting hit. This brings us back to two fundamental laws of tactical engagement, which are, one, don't get hit, and two, strike the enemy at will such that he cannot escape. And one could extrapolate that to a wide variety of situations in which there are no enemies, but it's a matter of solving problems of all kinds. In this case, there is no enemy, but there is a threat. So here you are sitting at your table, looking at the headlines, sipping a cup of coffee. Next thing you know, you're either dead or you are falling off your chair and rolling on the concrete at an angle at a rate of speed which produces a vector that causes the taxi cab to plow through your table and into the front of the coffee shop, perhaps injuring or killing several unfortunate people. And at the instant that happens, you are a centimeter off the line, say perpendicular to the line of the incoming vehicle, and you're alive.
That's a very pertinent illustration, particularly in the age of terrorism that we see today, where incidents of vehicle-related attacks are taking place in Paris and Berlin and London, and on a concerningly more frequent basis, such that you will not have time to react. In most cases, you simply must respond, and it has to be a trained response, because you can do instinctive things that might get you killed, but at the same time, the technique does not manifest until, kind of like Schrodinger's cat, the cat is alive and dead simultaneously inside the box until you open it. Then all other potentialities collapse and reality demonstrates itself to be one or the other.
Well, you're quite right. I was not thinking along the lines of terrorism, but your analogy is perfect. In point of fact, a great many more people are injured or killed every day all over the world by accidental conditions and emergencies rather than acts of war, which would be terrorism. I don't know if most people understand that terrorism is an act of war, but in any case, for you sitting in your chair, it doesn't matter if it's an accident or an act of war. Dead is dead. So, if the terrorist is a little bit better financed and organized and highly skilled, instead of trying to drive his car up on the street and hit people, he'll plant a bomb in the car, and when it explodes, everybody for a couple of 100 yards around will be either dead or injured, and there'll be absolutely nothing that anyone can do about it. There are limits to technique.
That's true, and we do see that there are complex attacks and compounded attacks and secondary devices, etc. But a lot of times what we're seeing, again, using the most recent illustrations of, the Paris truck attack and a couple other attacks, particularly London and Berlin come to mind, where, they were not complex, they were not well funded, but as you indicated, dead is dead. And the only weapon that they have available to them sometimes, some of these lone wolves or some of these smaller cells, is to just get a vehicle and drive into a crowded area. And whether there's a secondary attack or what have you, doesn't really matter as long as they get the body count and they instill the fear that is the objective of terrorism, which again, I agree with you that terrorism is indeed an act of war, is directed at civilian populations specifically.
Well, it is directed at one level against civilian populations, but its ultimate direction is at governments. In order to compel governments to comply with the wishes of the terrorists by targeting their civilian populations, the idea is that the civilian populations will either rebel against those governments that fail to protect them or vote them out of office.
Yes, terrorism has a political objective. It is making war on civilians at its heart. Again, there is the political purpose trying to affect a policy change, but dead is dead. So for the civilian who doesn't understand the where or the why, or certainly not all the details in the instant that it's happening, they have a choice. They can either stand where they are, they can move, and hopefully they've been training themselves to notice, to be aware, and then have the skills requisite to save themselves in that instance.
Right, so that this is an example of the fact that you have a 50-50 chance at best if you are well-trained, well aware, ready, and positioned all the time. 50-50 is that you happen to be the target of the individual behind the wheel as against the truck bomb, which takes out a square block and everybody in it.
I would like to think that the chances are better than 50 and 50 when you actually take the time to train, and particularly when you increase situational awareness. So it doesn't really matter how well your technique is if you don't have the awareness to sense the danger and take some form of action. Hopefully it's trained and skillful action.
Well, yes, the point is that this is not always possible, even for the most highly skilled and dedicated personnel. So in order to render your skills effective, you've got to have a tactical and strategic and policy context in which they operate. Now, my example of the car plunging off the road and into a restaurant or a bank or something like that kind is taken from life experience. I was not in this situation myself, but it happened in my neighborhood where a taxi just lost its brakes and something happened and the driver lost control of the vehicle and it just plowed right up on the curb and right into a restaurant. Very fortunately, it was about 11 o'clock in the morning and the restaurant was not yet open for business. And all the personnel were back in the kitchen or down in the basement doing preparation. So nobody was killed, but the entire restaurant was destroyed. And if anybody had been sitting there, they would have been killed. So after hearing about that, I made it a policy never to sit on the sidewalk at little outdoor tables and never to sit near the windows in any restaurant, which is, of course, a primary point of sales. Many restaurants that have nice street views or other kind of interesting things to be seen through the windows situate their tables at the windows so people can see outside. They can get light, and it's a very pleasant atmosphere in which to eat or talk. But two things I learned come through restaurant windows, one of which is automobiles, another of which is round shot. My wife at one time worked in a Japanese restaurant near the United Nations in New York, where a great many diplomats and corporate executives and so forth on expense accounts would eat. It was a very, very expensive, sort of highly specialized Japanese-type restaurant. And on two separate occasions, there were shootings out in the street, and rounds came through the windows into the restaurant. And fortunately, nobody got hit. But anybody could have been hit if they were sitting near those windows. And so I made it a policy when sitting in a restaurant or any kind of business establishment, I would always stay away from the windows as much as possible and always sit toward the back of the shop where if something came in through that window in the form of a vehicle or a flying body or something, that I would, have the least possible exposure to direct impact. And one can extrapolate these kinds of policies throughout one's life. If I happen to be sitting in a movie theater, I'm always, if possible, in the very last row on the aisle nearest to the door, so that if, as has been the case on occasion, people in the movie theater have some kind of dispute and some fool stands up and starts spraying the vicinity with gunfire, I'm the first one out the door. Or if there's a fire or any kind of emergency which is perceived, which can cause a panic, I don't have to be dealing with the problem of getting trampled by panicking patrons, and B, I don't have to injure anyone in order to fight my way out. I'm right out that door. You can extrapolate this across a wide range of different kinds of situations in life. So policy based on strategic concerns can obviate the need for the use of tactics and skills wherein, as you had in an earlier discussion referred to a quotation from Sun Tzu, rather than utilize great efforts and skills and complex and dangerous methods to address these kinds of problems, one simply avoids the problem completely from the outset.
And that leads to an idea of assuming risk, because we brought up the idea of terrorism, and the objective is to put fear into the population, and that includes you and me, in hopes of creating a policy change. But the idea of instilling fear is the terrorist's objective, and changing our behavior so much that in assuming risk, we thereby diminish our enjoyment of life. That is also the aspect in which the terrorists win. So there are things that I do, certainly always having situational awareness of who comes in and out of a restaurant or any type of shop that I'm in. Things along those lines are necessary. Yet at the same time, there are situations in which I cannot control all the variables, or I cannot maintain situational awareness to the degree that I would like. And in those situations, I have to just assume risk. But at least I've gone through the process of saying, I've done all that I can, and my enjoyment of this experience is such that I will assume the risk of perhaps leaving a vulnerability in place. But at least I did it with awareness. I did it with knowledge of forethought.
Yeah, and what you're discussing now, I think, is reducible to the concept of morale. The near-term objective of terrorist strategy is to destroy the morale of a population, which then has an effect on the policy of its government. As Napoleon famously said, the value of morale in a military establishment as compared to the value of the number of troops is as 3 to 1. The value of morale is 3 times greater than that of the number of troops. In other words, if you have 100 men who are each and all willing to kill, willing to die, and willing to do whatever is necessary to achieve the objective that they have been assigned, as against 1,000 men who are scared and cold and tired and hungry and just want to go home, that 100 men can win an engagement against 1,000 men. And that gives you, I think, somewhere along the line we had made reference to the Battle of Thermopylae, wherein the famous 300 Spartans in command of 1,000 Greeks had stood off an army of Persians in a narrow defile, which were at least 10 times their number, or perhaps more than that. Morale is often the key to victory, and the idea of terrorism is to destroy the morale of populations so that they become so tired that they're willing to surrender and submit. So we can effectively counter that kind of thing as a population of people who are not necessarily trained or organized for military operations, simply by having individual persons apply the principles of awareness, readiness, and position, skills, technique, and all the rest of it to their own personal private lives. Those are their families. And in thus shouldering the personal responsibility and defraying the entire problem for first responders and large government agencies, and distributing it widely across the entire population with no requirement for command and control systems, we are able to apply the very same strategy against the terrorist that he tries to apply against us.
That's excellent advice, and that's exactly what Everyday Samurai is about, because the samurai may have been elite and supported on the backs of the peasantry in order to have a wonderful lifestyle where they could focus on martial arts and be the protectors, but it also came at tremendous social cost. And we've learned in modern society that every individual is sacred. Every individual is aristocratic, or at least has the potential to be so, and has the right to be secure in their person and papers and effects and everything that they own. And that's the best outcome for everybody. That's where improved living standards come from. That's where material wealth comes from. And allowing for not a special class of protectors, but for everyone to be their own samurai in service to their own liberty and the security of a free state is really what we're all about. And that's exactly how having a population with an armed equilibrium to maintain that standard of security, not only for themselves, but for everyone, is really what we're all about here. And I want to delve into the more specific aspects of training for skills that will then manifest as technique. But first, I want to talk about the importance of individual readiness and to not only have the tools, but also the physical preparedness. And for me, especially as I get older, it's more and more important to have flexibility and mobility than physical strength or physique or looking good. I'm talking about having a health-focused fitness orientation. And let's face it, the stretching and the mobility is usually the most boring and least rewarding aspect of a workout. And it's usually the part that we skip over when time is short. But what if there was a way that was really satisfying to build not only strength and endurance, but also shred fat in a way that improves your mobility and puts you in a relaxed flow state? I'm talking about the kind of workout that you can get done in less than an hour with just your body weight and know that you are getting the kind of fitness that will make you a more resilient warrior. And that's exactly what the 6 Degree Flow program is all about. 6 Degree Flow is mobility-focused, expertly instructed workouts built around the physiology and psychology of the flow state. You'll feel the return of your body's proper alignment like never before, particularly if you've got a few hard miles under your belt or some stiff spots in the body. This is a yoga-based fitness program for the modern warrior. I finally made a commitment to sticking with a power yoga practice, and with 6 Degree Flow, you can too. So check it out at everydaysamurai.life/flow. There are more than 75 instructional and follow-along videos along with 4 detailed booklets describing the science of it all. It'll give you everything you need to restore your strength, flexibility, and stamina so you can perform your best when you need it. That's www.everydaysamurai.life/flow. So Jim, we've talked about technique and the difference from it being in its potential state to being actually drawn into manifestation as the need arises. How do we train for that?
There are a great many ways to train for that. Somewhere in Gorinsho, Musashi's Book of Five Rings, he speaks about studying the ways of all professions. And any practice, whether it be professional or not, which is pursued on a daily basis, routinely and regularly across long periods of time, will ultimately teach one the same lessons. They can be understood by accountants and waitresses and cab drivers and carpenters and athletes and soldiers and law enforcement officials and just anyone who practices any discipline at all, more or less as a way of life, will learn the same lessons. And these are the lessons of philosophy, policy, logistics, strategy, tactics, and skills integrated to produce consistently, predictably, within certain tolerances, the kinds of effects which in their turn produce the desired results that one has in mind. And this is technique.
Yeah, but we're talking about combat. We're talking about survival in the realm of human aggression. It's a big difference between an accountant and somebody who is looking for skills to keep them alive.
Well, not entirely. The focus in combative skill is combat. The focus in accounting skill is accuracy. But accuracy is equally as essential in combat, and it requires the same kind of training. If you are a marksman, there's the old shooter's axiom, aim small, miss small. One could be training to hit the broadside of a barn at 10 yards, but if one trains to hit a dime at 500 yards, then if one can do that kind of thing consistently by developing skill through proper body mechanics and an understanding of ballistics and through continual repetitive training, then under duress, in unpredictable, uncontrolled, suddenly emerging circumstances, at close quarters, one can make center mass shots or even head shots quite casually, as long as one's body is functioning. So the way the Japanese traditionally have approached this kind of thing, and one can see it in many different countries, is what the Japanese refer to as kata budo, which is to say the achievement of martial skill through prearranged patterns of drill. For thousands of years, people have been experiencing the exigencies of close combat and deriving from the experience of those who survive an understanding of certain patterns which arise, and from those patterns, developing patterns of training, which on the first level or at the first counter will seem rather arbitrary and mechanical to the neophyte, but having learned the fundamentals of skeletal alignment and posture and footwork and body mechanics, one learns how to make the various types of attacks and to engage those attacks in such a way as to avoid or evade being struck down, and to make one's own attack in the process in such a way that the enemy cannot so evade. And these return us to the two laws of tactical engagement. The purpose of skills is to implement those two laws. First, don't get hit. Secondly, strike the enemy at will such that he cannot escape. So there's a sort of pattern that one encounters here and there in the Japanese idiom, which is shu ha li. And the first category is to memorize repetitive movements, which first have to be learned correctly, which is what requires an instructor. And when one is able to move correctly through prearranged patterns of movement, one gets to the next stage, which is to understand how the movements work and to be able to work through prearranged patterns of movement with a training partner or with more than one training partner in such a way as to simulate patterns of combat which have been experienced many thousands of times by veterans in the field. This has to be done very carefully, very slowly, analytically, safely, and correctly, so that both parties to the exercise have complete confidence, both in their own skills and in those of the training partner, and in the goodwill of the training partner. One has to be able to trust the training partner with one's life, knowing that the training partner is not suddenly going to break the pattern and perform an unexpected attack for which one is not yet prepared to cope. Well, slowly, over time, two training partners running through prearranged drills will be able to increase the speed and the power of these drills to a point where they become almost as dangerous as an actual combative engagement. The only thing protecting the two participants being the knowledge of the pattern and the skill to execute the pattern effectively. This is called kata, which can be translated conveniently as drill. Most people translate it as form. I don't like this translation because it is very misleading. Most people become obsessed over time with executing the drills elegantly and beautifully, and they are judged on this basis. This is not the purpose of drilling. These are close combat drills. The nature of efficient movement is to be aesthetically pleasing. If you are a dancer or an acrobat or something of this sort, your movement is optimally efficient and therefore it is beautiful to see. But if you're closely engaged in combat, what's important is the enemy does not see what you're doing, does not understand what he can see. You are attempting, through the development of sensitivity, to discover what is the appropriate action or inaction to take at any given vector of time and space.
And I was so glad that you brought up shuhari, and I know that this is an accurate translation, but my understanding of it is to embrace the form, then to embody the form, and then to transcend it. And as you know, as somebody who is well-versed in Japanese martial arts, that there's a lot of focus on the letting go part, the third stage where we transcend the form and we've overcome it. And there's a documentary on Aikido called The Path Beyond Thought. There's the story of the magnificent cat that explains how he is able to catch the mice and explains why everybody else is not, because they're so overcome with form and they're worried about this and that. They're even thinking about catching the mice.
Neko no myojutsu.
So this the mysterious cat, mysterious techniques of the cat. And this type of thing really gets to be one of those Zen paradoxes where we're so focused on letting go of the thought and being without any sense of trying to strive and achieve anything, that we forget the fact that in order to get to that place, we have to spend a lot of time focusing on the original series in that triad, Shu, embodying the form and embracing it fully. And I remember you telling me in another conversation about when Isoyama Shihan came to your dojo and had a story about the founder of Aikido and what he said about basics. Can you relay that for us?
What's interesting about Isoyama Sensei in the context of our discussion is that at that time, he was a general officer in the Japanese Defense Forces on active duty. And most of his martial art related activity with respect to Aikido was in training Japanese soldiers for close combat. So that the nature of their training was very, very far removed from what the average Aikido practitioner was engaged in. And he came to do seminars with us once or twice a year. And I have a feeling, and I never asked him about this, but I have a feeling that he consented to do this for two reasons, one of which was that he had a close personal relationship with my teacher, but also because my teacher was teaching the pre-war form of Aikido, which Ueshiba O-sensei used to call Aikibudo. His post-war Aikido, which now is dominant throughout the world in the Aikido community, is something quite different. It's a wonderful art, and it has its legitimate uses, but it is not martial art by any definition. General Isoyama spoke to us about the problem of ki,
which is this psycho-spiritual energy that is all pervasive throughout the universe in that Asian mentality.
If you look at the character, the Chinese character, which is read chi in Chinese or ki in Japanese, it consists in two sub-characters. The top and external character depicts steam, and the small internal character underneath or to the left of that steam component depicts a kernel of rice. So this is a picture of steamed rice. The energy that is provided to our bodies through the process of digestion. It is a very straightforward illustration. There's nothing mystical about it. Of course, in the pre-scientific world, I suppose the idea that food provides energy and so forth is in itself a great mystery, but it is not a mystical, magical sort of idea in the context of modern science in any case. We burn fuel and this gives us energy. Most of the people who were training with O-sensei in the days that Isoyama sensei was training with him were very much concerned with this mysticism. They were engaged frequently in so-called ki exercises, which were to cultivate this mysterious, magical energy. O-sensei was a mystic, but before that he was a practical man, also having military and combat experience in war, and having a lifetime of practical training in traditional warfighting arts of ancient Japan. Whenever he would see his students engaged in these abstract mystical exercises, he would advise them that they were wasting their time, that they ought to be learning and understanding and applying basic mechanical, tactical skill.
Let me jump in a second to tell you about shop.everydaysamurai.life. If you're interested in personal security and readiness, you've probably got some tools that go into your everyday carry. Hopefully, this includes a tactical pen, because when you're legislatively or otherwise situationally unable to carry the best tools for the job, your last resort might just be a tactical pen. Having the right one could just be the deciding factor in a crisis. At shop.everydaysamurai.life, we've got an assortment of tactical pens ideally suited for strength and power when you need it most. A tactical pen means you've always got options. Plus, we're putting the finishing touches on a basic employment guide that will be yours as a bonus, absolutely free, when you purchase any EDC pen from our site. So check out shop.everydaysamurai.life today. Pick up a tactical pen, a first aid kit, or even some samurai-themed accessories. That's shop.everydaysamurai.life.
Isoyama Sensei began to laugh. He said the only time he had ever seen O Sensei lose his temper was when one day he entered the dojo and he saw a small knot of students engaged in some of these mystical rituals. And he approached them and asked them what they were doing. And they replied that they were trying to learn how to cultivate the mystic universal force of ki. Whereupon he just blew up. They were sitting on their knees on the mats talking. And O Sensei started pounding the mats with his hand, saying, "Don't you bloody fools realize that I was engaged in daily training for 60 years before I ever had any inkling of the idea of ki?" He said, "If you insist on wasting your own time, don't do it here. Don't waste my time. I'm here to teach you basic skill." And he started pounding the mat and saying, "So I want you to think about basic skill, imagine basic skill, ask about basic skill, research basic skill, train basic skill."
We will take it from the master that the way to develop technique and the way to be more situationally aware is by doing those basic skills until we have embodied them completely.
Exactly.
I want to thank you for your time this evening. It has been a great pleasure, and I know that everyone will get great benefit out of our conversation. We look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Tim.
Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time. Be sure to subscribe to our feed so to stay up to date with our newest offerings. If you like what you've heard here, give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Share it with a friend or someone you think would benefit from this message. Remember, the free PDF outline of Egen's show, The Book of Dignity, is available. Our compliments to you at everydaysamurai.life/dignity. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.